Я счастлив представить вам Джона Фредерика Бейлина, профессора Нью-Йоркского университета в Стони-Бруке, крупнейшего специалиста по теоретическому синтаксису и синтаксису славянских языков, в частности русского. Автора книги про русский синтаксис, которую большинство из вас читали, если не целиком, то, по крайней мере, почти целиком. Джон автор неисчислимого количества статей, посвященных, практически всем, а может быть, слово «практически» здесь излишнее, вопросам русского синтаксиса. Если сесть здесь и задуматься о том, какие вопросы Джон не осветил, не знаю, может быть, можно что-то придумать, но вряд ли это получится какой-то внушительный список. В общем, всякий, кто занимается русским синтаксисом, думает про русский синтаксис, любит русский синтаксис, испытывает чувства по отношению к русскому синтаксису, не может миновать того человека, который сейчас стоит рядом со мной. Еще важная вещь. Помимо всего этого, Джон старый давний друг нашего отделения. Когда первый раз ты тут оказался?
Последний?
Первый
раз. 15 лет назад.
Мне кажется, раньше.
Да.
Мне кажется, раньше.
Может быть, раньше.
В 95-м году, да? Первый раз, мне кажется. Да? Это не 15 лет назад.
А что было 15 лет назад?
15 лет назад
было что-то другое. Но когда я здесь был весь год, это было 15 лет назад.
Это было 15 лет назад.
Длительный курс.
Первый раз. Да, но первый раз был намного раньше.
Окей.
Первый раз был намного раньше.
Ну ладно.
Как-то после этого так сложилось, что время от времени Джон возвращается.
Ей.
И даже больше того, он старается возвращаться регулярно. Мероприятие, которое сегодня у нас происходит в качестве коллоквиума, несколько лет подряд называлось «Весенний Бейлин». Так что, помимо наслаждения от русского синтаксиса, которое нам сегодня предстоит, у Джона есть еще другая важная функция. Да? Его появление знаменует приход весны. А я передаю слово нашему докладчику. Джон Фредерик Бейлин, Marking for Movement.
Thank you.
Whatever it is.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Beautiful introduction. Very nice. I'm going to try not to destroy this microphone. So I'm going to do this in English, but I speak a little Russian, so you can do we can do the question periods. You can ask your questions in Russian. Can you hear me in the back? I'm okay? Okay. So, the most recent movement theory in generative grammar is a very elegant theory, which you learn when you do introductory syntax, advanced syntax, read Chomsky 1995, or any of the minimalist approaches where things are quite simple in terms of how movement is supposed to take place. So we know there's movement, we know we have structures, we know that elements are associated with a low part of the structure because of their argument status, and then they're associated with a high part of the structure for some other reason, because they're a question phrase, or they have some motivation to be for some semantic interpretation. They're associated with the high part of the structure, and they're also associated with the low part of the structure because of valence, argument structure, relation to a verb, whatever. So they have two places. That's why we call it movement, right? I mean, movement is a metaphor, right? I'll translate some words into Russian, especially words that you don't know, like metaphor. Yeah. So it may or may not really be movement in your brain. That's not the point. It's association with two different positions. One of them is where you see it in the word order, and the other one is where you know it has to be in the lexical semantics or something like that. That's what movement really means. And minimalism does a great job because minimalist syntax helps you build a tree up with various principles of architecture, which I won't talk about, but you know them. Merge, project. Those are the principles. Merge, project. It's a very simple system. That's why it's called bare phrase structure, if you've heard that term. We used to do it in a different way with templates called X-bar theory. It's not so different. You end up with a hierarchical structure, right? And then within that hierarchical structure, some elements move. And minimalism does it like this. So what I want to do today is just review quickly how minimalism normally does movement, and then go to two types of cases where minimalism doesn't do a good job. And I'm going to try to fix it without giving up everything. Okay? So here's how it normally works, and this is in your first box on your first page. And what I'm calling this is, are there more handouts for people coming? Yeah. What I'm calling this is marking for movement. But all I mean is, it has nothing to do with markedness. All I mean is, how do you get to move? What makes you move? Something in the system must mark you as a candidate for movement, right? So the normal system is like this. Here we go. And I call it M for M. I made that term up. M for M. Marking for movement. Okay? System number one is the standard system in this box. So here's how it works. Okay, you build a little bit of a tree. You build a syntactic object in the normal way. That's step one. Step two. A head of some kind is attached to the top of that tree. Right? It has some feature. So we're just going to call the feature F for feature. Right? F for feature. That's what we do, right? Okay, so some feature could be anything. And this feature has the property of strength. We call it strength, that it's going to attract something to it. It's going to attract something to its specifier position, probably. Okay? And this is how it works. It looks down the tree, and that we mean C command. It looks down the tree for something with the right feature, another F. The high one says, I'm looking for F. It looks down to the found F. They match. There's a whole thing about one is interpretable, one is uninterpretable. I don't care. Okay? It's true. And then they come into a relationship because it's the same feature. This could be WH movement, right? Or something. And then because it's strong, it pulls this guy up because it has to be local. They have to end up local. And local means in the specifier position of that head, or maybe even inside that head if it's head movement. There are two types. Okay? So that's step 3, the feature's check. Step 4, the strong feature forces movement, and you have a couple of examples. If it's a subject movement, like English subjects that start low and move to spec of TP, the feature is looking for like a nominal. It's looking for a D. It's looking for DP. And that's why it has to be a subject. What's beautiful about this system is that it's going to find the first one, the closest one. And it's not going to go past the first one to the second one. So if it's a subject movement, it's going to find the subject, not the direct object, because the subject is closer. And there's some kind of principle that says, always find the closest guy. A simple economy principle, which is why you get, in number 1, John saw her and not her, John saw, or something. And why you get, in a WH question, who saw what and not what did who see. Right? Which is ungrammatical. So that's it. That's the system. You have a feature, you look down, you find your friend, you say, let's get together, moves up, and you're done. And it prevents you from going lower to a lower position. That's the whole system. And it gives us all sorts of things that we knew about syntax before this system just come for free. Why subjects are in subject position and direct objects are not in subject position. Why the first WH phrase moves and not the second WH phrase. Why heads can't jump over 4 other heads to go up there, the head movement constraint. All of those things are impossible because it's not the closest. So it gives us a lot of good results that we already knew we needed, but this gives them to us for free. So that's why people like it. Okay? There it is, the movement theory in 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, whatever. Okay? So I'm done. One example of where it works really well is in your second box, which is English multiple WH questions. Think about English, right? In English, when you make a question with a question word or question phrase, only one of them moves. It's not like Slavic languages. You don't say who, what, bought. You say who bought what. And you don't say what did who buy. And that's because when the C head looks down, it finds who before it finds anybody else and says, oh, I'm happy. Boom, done. Who saw what? The opposite case, which is called a violation of superiority, what you see in 3b or 4b, what did who say? Ungrammatical. Where does who work? Ungrammatical. You can see in the tree in 1b that that's impossible because you can't skip the subject to get to the object because the subject is closer. So this system where you look from the top and you look down the tree, it explains superiority in English. And everybody's happy. Is everybody happy?
Yay.
Are you good so far? Okay. Because this is just the setup for what's coming next. Okay? Now, what I'm doing today is giving you 2 situations where that simple system fails. And we're going to try to fix it without giving up that simple system. So 2 types of cases where that doesn't work very well. Okay? So you can turn the page to, or you have small pages. Sorry about that. So you can shift your eyes to the right. Now, in Bulgarian, a Slavic language you may have heard of, that has multiple WH movement where all the WH phrases move. Russian is like that too, but Bulgarian has different properties, as you probably know. You also have something which looks like superiority. So look at the ones, and these are very famous examples in 5 and in 6, where you move them both up above the clitics, above the auxiliaries, above everything. But who has to come before what? So 5a is who what, and 5b is what who, and that's ungrammatical. Same in 6. Who what is good. That 6 is an example that they have to rise up above the clitics, right, and form a group. This looks like the same thing as English, right? It's has the same name, superiority. The subject has to be higher than the object. That's what it's called. But if you think about this system I just described, it doesn't work very well. Let's try to do it on Bulgarian. Exactly the same thing. What do we need to add to the grammar to make Bulgarian work? Okay? You see the puzzle. We have to end up with who, what, and not what, who. Okay, so what you do is, this is the standard analysis, which is a disaster. Okay? I'm telling you in advance to not like the standard analysis. Okay? I'm going to try to show you why. It is the standard analysis. In the box on page 2, the big box, number 3. Okay? The beginning is exactly the same as English. You have a subject and an object. They're both WH phrases. You bring in C, which has the WH feature. You look down. Now you start to run into trouble because of minimalism. Okay, you look down and what do you find? You find the subject. You bring up the subject. If that was English, you'd be finished. Who saw what? But you have to make the assumption, what I call assumption 0, that everybody has to make for Bulgarian, which is the WH phrases themselves have to move. It's their property. Every WH phrase is screaming out for movement. It's like, move me. That's not true in English, right? The second one never doesn't have to move. If there's a higher one, it just sits there and goes, I'm good, right? But in Bulgarian, they're all screaming out. I'm going to later call that they have a flashing light going, move me, right? But the standard analysis says, look down, find the first one, move it up. Okay, now then you have to do another assumption, and this is where I start to get really unhappy, right? You have to say that this prober up there in Bulgarian isn't satisfied with 1. That's not true in English. You do 1, you're good. In Bulgarian, if you do 1, you're good only if there's 1. But if there's more than 1, then you're not good. That's already really weird. So the probe in Bulgarian has to be what we call the probe that keeps on probing. If there's more WHs, it doesn't stop. That's already an incoherent notion, actually, if you think about it. How does it know how many there are? What if it wants to probe when there's no more? Or what if it doesn't want to probe when... that's a problem of its own, but okay. It's an assumption that the probe that's assumptions 1 and 2. And it has another property, which is, here it is, right? We're talking about this element right here. This is the position that they move to. That's called spec of CP. What if you move 2? Well, you need another spec of CP. Or you need to multiply occupy that one. So you need to say about Bulgarian that it has the probe that keeps on probing, and it also has multiple specifiers. Okay, you can say that if you want to. And people say that. Those are assumptions 1 and 2. So now what happens? So you move the first one there, that's the subject, right? Here it comes. Who? You did that, just like English. Now you keep on probing, and you find the direct object. What? And you want to bring that one up too. But where does that one have to go? It has to go under this one. Or you don't get the right word order. Superiority, right? You have to get who, what, not what, who. That's not what's supposed to happen in minimalism. When you move, you're supposed to go to the top of the tree. Well, if you go to the top of the tree, you get exactly the wrong result. So we need another assumption. And now we're in real trouble. Assumption number 3. This is a very generally accepted thing, but it doesn't make any sense. It's called tucking in. You know, like tucking a child into bed. You know, you tuck them in. I have a daughter, so I know how to do that, right? She's small enough that I know how to do it, right? But you have to take the second one and you have to stick it there. That is not normal behavior. Okay? In fact, it's a violation of one of the basic principles of our simple minimalist system, which is every move extends the tree. Every move goes to the top of the tree. You can't move into here. We know that. But in this particular case with multiple specifiers, Norvin Richards, whom I love and respect, thought up tucking in. which I don't love and respect. But that's okay. It's just an idea. And the idea is you move in here, and the way it works is, well, there's another principle of economy, which is you have multiple specifiers, and this one is a little bit closer to you. And so you want to make a short move instead of a long move. So you make a short move. So you have to say that A, you are allowed to make a short move, and you have to say that B, you have to make a short move. Otherwise you get the wrong facts. So you have to make it possible, and you also have to make it mandatory, obligatory, necessary. That's the standard system, I'm sorry to tell you. So step 3, it tucks in. And they're not equal distance, even though multiple specifiers should be equal distance for other purposes. So that's a problem also. And then if you buy all of that, it looks like the picture in 8. You've got the multiple probing, you've got the first move up and the second move under, and you get the right word order. But you had to do all of this horrible stuff. You had to give up the extension. You had to have the probe that keeps on probing. You had to have the multiple specifiers, which are not the same distance apart. You had to have the tucking in. You had to force the tucking in. And only with all of that craziness does that work. Okay? So those problems are in box 4. You have to say all these things about Bulgarians. Special C, special specifiers, special probing, special movement, special tucking in. All of that stuff you have to say just to make Bulgarian work. So Bulgarian superiority is not like English superiority in this system. That's the problem. All right. Now, there is a very simple solution, kind of. It's intuitively very simple. What do we want? What we want is, here's the who, and here's the what, approximately, right? What we want is when they end up here to be in the same order. That's what we need, because that's what's grammatical. So the simplest way to do that without any of these extra assumptions would be to move the what first. And then move the who. And everybody extends the tree, and we don't need any fancy machinery. So how do you do that? Well, you can't do that by probing from above. Because if you probe from above, you're going to hit this one first. And we want this one not to go first. We want this one to go first. So that's, now we're entering Bailyn territory. Okay, so be careful. I'll put on your gas mask. Here we go. Right? But I really think that even though what I'm going to tell you is a little crazy, it's not as crazy as tucking in. Okay? That's your choice. But so I'm arguing against that system in favor of one which is intuitively better. This moves first and then that in the normal tree building way. But the question is, how does this move first when there's no, you build a tree from the bottom, so you've created like a verb, saw, and then the direct object. You can call it NP or DP, I don't care, which is what? You've built that much. Now, what makes this guy move? Well, I'll tell you what makes him move. Remember, he's crying out for movement. I have to move. Remember? Everybody needs that. Everybody needs that for a Bulgarian to work. Right? Because they all have to move. If you don't have that, then some guys will not move, and then the system falls apart. Okay? If you have another suggestion, that's great. We'll talk about it later. Okay? But they all move. The descriptive fact is they all move. And so they each have a feature that says, I have to move. And that is, so what we're going to call this one, which is marking for movement number 2, is what I call self-marking. It's self-marking. it doesn't get the instruction. It doesn't get the instruction to move from above. It gets the instruction to move from itself. Well, that's what we need to handle Bulgarian anyway. It's just we want to build it into our movement system. So these guys, if you're Bulgarian and you have WH phrases, they've got a flat, what I have been calling for a couple of years since one of our summer schools, the blinking blue light. This flashing light. Move me, move me, move me, move me. And every Bulgarian WH phrase has that. Everybody needs that assumption. Okay? So we use that assumption. We say, okay, so this is not probed from above. It's going to go to that position, but it's not triggered, what I call marked for movement from above. It's marked for movement by itself. That's what marks it for movement. Okay, so that's what I'm calling M for M number 2, which is self-motivated movement. And I have a paper about this, which is totally crazy, but I can send it to your department if you want to look at it. This is going to work perfectly. This is going to mark for move, go there. This is going to mark for move, go there. Everything's perfect, except you should see that there's a huge problem, right? At the time where this starts flashing, there's nowhere to go. We don't have the higher part of the tree yet. So how can you go and, what you're looking for is C. That's still the thing you agree with. But how can you go and join C when C isn't in the tree? Well, you can. That's what the crazy account says. There is this idea, and it goes back a long time to the early 90s, called Sidewards Movement. And Sidewards Movement was created for completely different purposes, which basically says you're building up pieces of tree in parallel. That must be true, right? You build a DP out of little nouns and adjectives and demonstratives, and you make a DP, right? That's the subject. And then you make another DP, but that's the direct object. Later, they're going to join the same tree because they're going to be related to some verb, right? But you can build them separately. So the way, here, this is a nice desk, right? You throw out all your lexical items that you're using in the derivation on the desk. That's called the numeration. Nouns and verbs and adjectives and C's and T's and all these little pieces of stuff, right? And then you start building syntactic objects. That's how it works. And you're done when you've collected all of those items into a coherent syntactic object with all the features checked in the right way. That's what a derivation of a sentence is. So let's take that seriously and say, okay, I built my subject out of nouns and adjectives. I built my object out of a pronoun or something. And now here's my verb. It needs an object. Okay, good. Now it needs a subject. Okay, we have a VP now. Here comes T. Okay, we're getting there. Now we pull something. TP, we're done. Good. That was easy. You know, everything was used up. Everything was checked off. If you did things in the wrong places, you can't attach T to N, you know, because they don't have the right features. It's all feature driven. So you have your workspace. So who tells you that you are not allowed to do this? You build up a piece of stuff, and then you remove something from that and combine it with another piece of stuff in your... That's sidewards movement. Sometimes it's called interarboreal relations, like relations between trees. But it's not really relations between trees. It's relations between subtrees, right? You haven't used all your pieces yet, but I've built a bit of a structure. This. No, this. Just the verb and a direct object. But the direct, I'm Bulgarian, right? The I being the derivation, not the human being, right? My what is flashing. It's saying, you cannot wait to satisfy me. You must immediately, as soon as I've got my thematic role and my argument structure and maybe case and all that low-level stuff is taken care of, now my flashing WH light says you better deal with this right now or you're ungrammatical. Okay? So how do you do that? You exit the tree, that's sidewards movement, and you combine with C. So now, so you could do that. So you're going to create a little thing like this. And then later, when you get to the subject, you're going to create a thing like this. And it's going to have the right? It's just like a verb with a direct object and a subject, except it's a C with its first merge and its second merge. So you're going to preserve the order that you see in the original tree. And that's exactly what we want. Okay? The reason that people don't do it this way is because they don't think of the sidewards movement and the self-marking as a legitimate thing. But it is a legitimate thing. So now let me show you how that works. You have pictures. You like pictures, right? Okay. Here we go. Top of page 4. Here's the derivation of the Bulgarian. This is what I just told you. Step 1, merge the object. Direct object, accusative case, thematic role, whatever. Step 2, blinking blue light. Move sideways, like in number 16. Move out of the verbal structure into the relationship with C. You have 2 separate subtrees. They haven't been combined yet. Step 3, the first subtree continues up to the subject. That's WH1. Okay? Nominative case, or agent, role, whatever. It also has a blinking blue light. It also exits the tree. It joins a cluster with the other one. So that's in 17. You see it moving up to subject position. That's a movement. And then it moves out and joins the cluster. Now, the cluster idea for Bulgarian is also not new. There's an analysis of Bulgarian multiple WH movement that uses clusters of WH phrases by Gravendorf. But they're not in a separate tree, they're on the main tree. But the cluster is the same idea. So he has a lot of arguments in favor of the cluster. And one of them is you don't need tucking in. So it's the same spirit as Gravendorf. You can read it, it's in the bibliography. So it's like, I don't even know Gravendorf and I'm friends with him. Right? Okay. Now, you have this cluster of C, and this business now has to move back into the other subtree, and that's what you see in step 5. There's some technical issues here. I won't waste your time on those, but they're not trivial. First, the C head has to merge with TP. That's in step 5 in number 18. Then you go to page 5. And in step 6, the cluster, and all that's left is who and what. Or who and what and where. Or who and what and where and when. Or how many WHs you have in their original order. Now move into the subtree A, into the spec of CP, and you derive the Bulgarian question that you wanted from the beginning. Does that make any sense at all? Okay. I mean, you see how it works step by step, okay? So here's a summary in number 20. What's important is the element marks itself for movement. It's not marked by something from above. That's the new part. There's a Bošković paper in 2007 that does something similar that you can read. It's different, but it's similar. The blinking blue light makes things. You go from the bottom up, you move out of the tree because there's nowhere else to go. You find your friend, C, you build the cluster, and then at the very end you move back and you get the right order of the WH phrases. Advantages of doing it this way are in 21. No tucking in. You don't have to say anything special about Bulgarian C. It doesn't need to keep on probing. It only needs one specifier, not multiple specifiers. The one specifier is a cluster. You don't need the probe that keeps on probing. The only difference between English and Bulgarian is the blinking blue light. That's the only difference. Everything else is the same system. The blinking blue light is a difference that everybody needs anyway. So that's the minimal difference you need to account for the two languages. Don't need any extra stuff at all except for the possibility of self-motivated movement and the possibility of sidewards movement. But those have been independently proposed. So I'm like stealing ideas. That's what you do. You've put them to good use in a different context. Now, it's not just multiple WH movement. It might be in 22, you have a box of many things which might be self-motivated. Object shift in Scandinavian languages, head raising of certain kinds, maybe quantifier raising, which also seems to be self-motivated. Quantifiers have to raise to get the right semantic interpretation. They're not, some people have tried to have them probed from above, from like a existential phrase or a universal phrase, but those people are all at NYU, right? So those are our, yeah. But other than that, there might be self-motivated movement. It might work better also. That's possible. But we don't care about that. All I wanted to show you was that we can handle this problem. Well, first of all, people don't think there's a problem. This is great, right? People don't think there's a problem until I came and said, well, I don't think this Richards tucking in system works very well. You need a lot of assumptions. And this system, even though it's a little bit crazy, seems a little bit crazy, it doesn't need any of those assumptions. It doesn't need any assumptions except for the blinking blue light. And that everybody needs. So it's a much more compact system. So now we're at the bottom of page 5, and we can say that English, in the box number 9, English superiority comes from marking for movement from above. Bulgarian superiority comes from marking for movement by yourself. We can eliminate tucking in entirely, which is really good news, and we're good, okay? The basic system of feature-driven movement is still okay. All right, so that's the first half. Okay, the first way in which the system doesn't work, that we tried to fix it. Now the second half is a totally different area. Okay, and here the problem is a much more minor problem, but we still have to fix it to be happy. So this one has to do with blocking effect. Hi, it's okay. So there's this observation. We're now at the bottom of page 5. There's this observation that's well known when you talk about scrambling. And scrambling is the general movement process that gives us free word order. So obviously something when we think about Slavic languages, at least if they're not too far south, that we have to worry about. In many languages, we build a tree, and then there's further movements that give you different word orders, and those are usually just referred to as scrambling. You take the object, it goes way up there. It can even go into the superordinate clause, 3 clauses above. Something like topicalization in English, but freer, much freer. And there's a huge literature on scrambling in Japanese, in a lot of languages, not in English so much, but in Slavic languages and Japanese and Korean and Turkish and Hindi, and a bunch of other languages that you guys know about that I don't know about. There's a general thing called scrambling. Here's the problem. What kind of movement is scrambling? And there's a big literature on that. It looks like there's scrambling of the type that's like moving to subject position, A movement, and there's scrambling of the type that's sort of like WH movement, bigger, further to the edge of the high clause, called A bar movement. And there's a lot of literature. Some people think there's both. Some people think it depends on the language. There's a lot of difference on that. But in languages that have long-distance scrambling, where you can get from the direct object of the subordinate clause can end up at the beginning of the main clause. You know, in languages that have that, scrambling has a weird property. And this is the observation. The weird property is that scrambling is not subject, it seems, to WH islands. So when you do basic English syntax, you learn about WH islands, right? So this is a case, just going to, these Bulgarian things have to go. So WH island is a case like this, where you have some phrase moves here in the subordinate clause. So this could be like, oh no, not think. We want to wonder. Right, so there's something like, oh, John wonders where Mary lives. That's fine. That's local WH movement under wonder. Or John thinks, John asked, or John wonders, you know, who Mary gave the flowers to. Fine. And then you try to ask a question about the flowers here, right? And you can't do that because this position is occupied. That's the WH island. You can't go, what did John wonder who Mary gave to? What? Terrible. And you see those examples all the time in introductory syntax, and the explanation is this move is too long for some reason. They used to call it subjacency. Now they call it phases. It's too far, right? So you have to do all movements like that through spec of CP. That's called successive cyclic movement. And spec of CP is occupied, so you have a WH island, right? That's a standard stuff. But what if this guy is a phrase that's not a WH? It's just a guy that wants to scramble because this language has scrambling. Well, should it have a problem? It should have exactly the same problem, right? This move is too far, and this position is occupied. That's done now in terms of you have to get to the edge of the phase before you can move out of the phase. That's how we do it now. We used to call it subjacency. It doesn't really matter what you call it. You can't do a huge single move like that. Everybody knows you have to go through spec of CP. But spec of CP is occupied. So long distance scrambling should be subject to WH islands. This has nothing to do yet with the marking system. This is just a fact. If these guys as WHs are subject to this restriction, they should be subject to it if they're just scrambling also. And they're not. So it's everybody's problem. Okay, so first let me show you the evidence that this is a problem. Go to page 6. Now, you could say, oh, scrambling isn't even movement. Ha! You could say, well, your problem is actually not what you think it is. Your problem is you think scrambling's movement. Someone could say to me, right? And I would say, well, I have evidence that scrambling is movement. Oh, really? What's your evidence? Well, the evidence is that there are many restrictions on movement which apply to WH movement exactly the same as they apply to scrambling. Okay? Not this one, not the island, but a lot of other ones. So take a look at, and you have a bunch of them in, this is from a paper that I'm working on right now, which I could even send you even though it's not finished, where we show, and this has been done for German, it's been done for Japanese, that although Japanese is different because there's no overt WH movement, but for WH and scrambling languages, that there's a bunch of conditions where they're both bad. It's bad to move out of adjuncts in 23 for both. You can just look along the edge here at the stars. WH is bad, scrambling is bad. WH is bad, scrambling is bad. WH is bad, scrambling is good, right? So it depends. For the adjunct condition, both are bad. So it does have to be movement. If you have a theory, and there are theories that scrambling is not movement, but those theories have nothing to say about these things, right? The same constraints apply to WH as they do to scrambling. You see that in 23. You see that in 24 with the complex MP constraint. You know, stuff that was discovered in 1967. Before all of us were born, well, except for some of us. Right? By Ross, in his famous thesis on constraints, he found all these constraints, and some of those constraints apply to scrambling. That's why we think it's movement. So you can't tell me it's not movement because the adjunct condition applies, the complex NP constraint applies. But WH islands do not apply. So now we have a paradox. Whoops, and I'm losing this thing. Okay, got it back. And these examples are taken from Zemskaya's Ruska Razgovorная Речь, right, 1973. Amazing book. Amazing. Is it required reading here in the cafedra? It's cool. Because she was the first one to go and say, what people really say is what matters, not what the Academy of Science tells us to do or what you learn in school. She really used Razgovorная Речь. I mean, she really used conversational Russian. And there's sentences in there that are like crazy. But it's like the beginning of corpus linguistics in a way, right? Except oral stuff, not written. That's the real stuff. No offense to people who, you know, who read. And she has these examples. So people, every time I talk about this, there's a huge fight about example number 25b. So do not give me a hard time about example 25b. It's in Zemskaya's book. Ha! So give her a hard time about it. Okay? And then it was taken by Yedrov in 1992 in his thesis, and then it was taken by Müller and Sternefeld in a paper in Linguistic Inquiry, which kind of branded it into everybody's consciousness. Like, we can argue about this particular example, but the fact, and there's a lot of them, but the basic fact is that WH islands do not restrict scrambling. That's why some form of 25b is okay. And some form of 26a and 26b is the same as 25b, sorry. Those are okay. So you end up with a situation that looks like 28. Some constraints, you see what 28 shows you, the chart? Some constraints apply to both WH and scrambling, and some don't. We don't have a system for that. So, go to page 7. We're getting towards the, I haven't yet told you the problem. This is not the problem. This is only the setup. Ritzy, in 1990, in Relativized Minimality, a brilliant little book. That's a good one. That's a really good one. Even though we don't do things that way anymore, that is some excellent syntax. I mean, like I use it with first-year graduate course or second-year graduate courses because it's so nicely written and it's a good theory. But the basic theory is this. There's A-bar elements like WH and certain kind of adverbs and stuff. And they block other A-bar elements. So, but A elements like subjects, arguments, don't block. So you can WH over a subject. That's no problem, right? But you can't WH over another WH. So A bar blocks A bar, but A blocks A. You can't do long subject movement over an intermediate subject, right? So, and heads block heads. That's why it's called relativized minimality. That things only block things of the same kind. That's the point of the book. It is great. He goes a little crazy in chapter 3. Happens. But it's only got 3 chapters. So the first 2 are just brilliant. Okay? The basic idea is A bar blocks A bar. But this is a violation of that because scrambling is A bar and WH is A bar and WH doesn't block scrambling. So relativized minimality is too crude. It's too rough. It's not specific enough. So Ritzy figured that out in 2004. 14 years later, the same guy fixed his own problem by saying, oh, it's not actually A bar and A bar. It's something within A bar. We need a typology of features. We already had a typology of features. We had A and A bar. Now we have to say, well, inside A bar, we have quantificational stuff and non-quantificational stuff. That is, inside A bar, we have WH, that's quantificational. We have focus, that's quantificational. Then we have like boring adverbs. That's non-quantificational. Okay? That was his idea, and he showed that in French, I mean, there's a lot of examples. You can do kind of WH movement over some adverbs if they're not quantificational, but you can't do WH movement over other adverbs if they are quantificational. And you can't do WH movement over negation because it has some kind of what he calls quantificational effect. So he broke the features into classes, and one of the classes is plus Q, and the other one is minus Q. Maybe you need more than that, but that's already an improvement. Now, if we take that and say, well, scrambling is definitely minus Q because scrambling is doesn't have a quantificational effect, then we have an explanation for why it's not subject to WH islands. Because it's not A bar blocking A bar, it's plus Q not blocking minus Q. So we can call that relativized minimality. Right? And that's what you see in number 31. Plus Q blocks plus Q, minus Q does not block plus Q. You have some derivations in 32. Standard WH movement in 32A. The scrambling feature that people use is sigma. Is that sigma or is that backwards? I can't remember. My Greek letter is not so good. Is that how we want it to look? Where is it? There it is. It's in tiny little, there it is. In 32B, right? The little F feature, it's like that. Okay? So this is your scrambling feature. Now, I didn't propose this feature. This feature, it's just sigma for scrambling. S for scrambling. It's just like F for feature or WH for WH, right? But it's proposed, it doesn't matter. It is a mystery what this thing is, because what does it mean? Is it topic? Is it focus? Is it discourse? Or is it just nothing? And if it's nothing, why do we even need a feature? Those are good questions. And you go to, there's in the references a nice paper by Tomoko Kawamura in 2004 that argues in favor of why we need a feature. You cannot do it without features. It's probably not topic and focus, or at least not always. So that's why it has its own Greek letter. Okay? And there's also Gravendorf and Zabel have a paper where they also argue that you need a feature for scrambling. So let's say you need a feature for scrambling, but it's definitely a minus Q feature. So it doesn't get blocked by this, and we have an explanation now for that little puzzle. Okay? We're almost done. So you can look at 34, or actually 33 is a WH island, where you try to move a lower WH over a higher WH, you get a blocking effect from Ritzy. 33B, you try to scramble over the WH island, you don't get a blocking effect, and everything's fine. And you derive Zemskaya's sentences with a doctor here that moves over a slushal kagda there, right? And you can move out of that. That's what Zemskaya's sentences show. So the Ritzy 2004 system with the plus Q and the minus Q takes care of those, and we're happy. Until right now, I'm going to show you why we're not totally happy. This is the problem. what if this thing here is a quantifier? Like every boy, or no man, or some people. Okay? Well, it's a quantifier, so it's got to be a plus Q element. What does our theory predict? The Ritzy theory. Our theory predicts that these guys should be blocked by WH islands. Because it's a plus Q, that's a plus Q, so it should fail. You should not be able to scramble quantifiers out of WH islands. That's a prediction. But you can. I am actually, when I first started thinking about this question, which actually was a question that was asked by a reviewer of my paper, said, what happens with quantifiers? I said, well, I know what the theory predicts. This is science. We check the predictions. The predictions all say that these should be bad. And so I sent out a survey to a lot of native speakers of Russian, and they all said they're fine. They're fine. You can scramble quantifiers of WH islands. Some of the examples are in 35A and B. I guess those are the only examples I gave you here, but in the draft of the paper, there's a lot more of them, and they're okay. So now what is going on? Do we want to give up the Ritzy theory? Well, no, because then we can't do the blocking that we always did before. So this is why I have now the final way that you can mark something for movement. You can mark something for movement syntactically. Not from a probe from above, but by merging. And this is what I mean. Remember your desk full of items, right? One of your items is a nominal, a DP, a quantifier, like every boy. You put it together. You put the every with the boy, you spring up a DP. It has a little Q feature. It's a Q thing, right? But it's a DP or something. And you also have hanging around this guy. What is that guy? Well, that guy's just your scrambler, kind of. So this is, here we're way in Bailyn territory, okay? This is really the newest part of all of this, right? Which is, anything you have in your derivation has to be on your desk. That's for sure. So this thing is not just a feature that you attach to the other features. Because if you had a DP with a Q feature and you added a scrambling feature because you can say, I want to scramble anything I want, then the Q should cause a block with a WH island, right? But that seems to be not what happens. So what I think happens is actually this. Here's the DP in its natural state. It's a natural quantifier. And here comes the scrambling feature as a head, as a syntactic head. And it creates a new syntactic item, a scrambling phrase. And the features that are buried inside there are not available. The only thing that's up there is this thing. You see what I mean? So it's not a feature bundle. It's one element embedded inside another. So there are feature bundles, and all the features are active when there's a bundle. But this is not a bundle. This is like, this thing takes over, and it says, I myself am minus Q, so I can get out of WH islands. Now, if we had any independent support for that, we would be really happy. Well, here's some independent support for that. Supposing you had here, and this is what ties the two parts of the talk together. Suppose you had here a WH with a blinking blue light, like a Russian WH phrase or a Bulgarian WH phrase that must move. Then if you tried to put it inside the scrambling guy, you should have a crash because this WH here has to go to a different place than this scrambling guy there does. So you either satisfy this one or you satisfy that one, but you can't satisfy both. And so what it means, the prediction is that languages with overt WH movement, like Russian or Bulgarian, should not be able to scramble the WH phrases. And that's right. You can't scramble a Russian WH phrase into a different clause and have it still be interpreted in the other clause. You can do it in Japanese. Japanese scrambles its WHs freely, but Japanese doesn't have overt WH movement, right? So it's not a flashing blue light, right? So you actually come out with exactly the result that you want. And this, okay, it is not a common observation that you can't, that it's not, it's my generalization that languages with overt WH movement cannot scramble the WHs. It seems English, for example, cannot topicalize WHs. You either do the WH, even if they're not the ones that you just can't do it. The same reason. But Japanese can. But there's an amazing paper by Takahashi in 1993 or something about Japanese WH scrambling that says, oh, you can scramble them, but then they have to be interpreted up there. It turns it into overt WH movement. That might also fall out of this system. It's not clear whether we can make that a side effect of this. But what it leads to is a third type of marking, and that's my point, which is when you mark something for scrambling, you actually create a different kind of syntactic object, and it loses the character of its inside features, and it just becomes a scrambled guy. And it behaves as a minus Q element, which is not what I expected. But that led to M for marking for movement number 3, which is marking in the course of the derivation, like this. So that's basically it. You can see a picture of that in 37. You can see the blocking data summarized in 39. Scrambling always behaves as a minus Q element. It's never, I didn't show you all the facts, but scrambling is never blocked by WH or by focused elements and so on. And the prediction that we just looked at is that the second type, the blinking blue light, and the third type should be incompatible. So you should never be able to scramble overt WH moved elements. And that, I think, is true. And if you know languages where that's not true, then I'm wrong. That's easy. That's good stuff when you can disprove an idea easily with simple data. And the conclusion is very simple. There are 3 ways that you can become marked for movement. The way we always knew, probe comes down and pulls you up. The way where you do it yourself, but you need sidewards movement to make it happen. And the way where in the course of the derivation, somebody else comes along and superimposes on you the need to move. And that's the third kind. The end? The end. Okay. One hour. Exactly 1 hour, right? Okay. But whatever is your usual tradition. There's no usual tradition. Then
we can do that whatever way you like.
Okay.
So, or me?
Me. Sure. Okay. Great. But then I know the person has to speak into a microphone, right? For the question. So where is... and there's the microphone. So, and I can repeat the question if that helps. But you might as well... is the person supposed to come to you?
No.
Okay. So here's the first question right there. Okay, well, we have 2 of them. Hi. Great. Right, the first question is right here. Right here. This young man who I know. And I better get my pen ready.
We seem to have some motivation to have marking for movement too, but wouldn't it disappear if we could make a cable style shell that incorporates both WHs, so we can deal with it without the sidewards movement and just move the group that has all of the WH directly in there, and non-WH objects are then out of it, and it would also explain piping straightforwardly, but yeah, like that.
Let me understand. So you're saying would it still move? Would it still be self-motivated? Move from the bottom? It's just.
I say we wouldn't really need self-motivated then, because there would be a shell that is regularly probed by C, and the shell probes the guys and the shell checks with the guys under it, but the group of the shell is moved, so they all move.
That's basically Gravendorf's analysis. I think what you're talking about is Gravendorf's analysis. And it's a perfectly possible thing. Then you'd be like English, you'd look down, you'd find this group, kind of. And the group would have already formed. So the only question for Gravendorf is, how does the group form? Right? How does the object and the subject form into this, what you call the shell? How do they form that? You need a system for that also, right? Which is not impossible. So it's a variant of what I'm talking about, but it's very similar to what Gravendorf has. So then it becomes almost a matter of, which is worse? Sidewards movement or whatever you have to do to form this shell? And either is possibly okay. So it's an okay suggestion for me. I don't think that suggestion is. Now you could say, oh, it's better because you don't need sidewards movement. Maybe so, but you do need sidewards movement for other things. So it's not such a big loss to have sidewards movement. So it's a kind of 50-50, I think. So I'm happy. That's pretty good. When you can come out of a question with 50-50, you're okay.
So my question is about the third type of marking for movement.
Which type?
The third one.
Third one, yeah.
So I think that if you merge this, say, dp with the head marked plus sigma, would this shell block not only plus q feature, but also, say, phi features or case feature?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a matter of what the timing of it is.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So, yes, of course it looks like a problem, of course.
Because if you do it after case checking or agreement, so it would be under merge or tucking in.
Well, it wouldn't be tucking in, but it would be kind of under merge, which we don't want that either. But, yeah, I have to think about that. I mean, obviously, if you do it right away before all the A relations, you either have just a problem, or you have to say it blocks some things and doesn't block other things, and we don't want that, although we could appeal to the A bar split there too. Or those relations, the A relations that you're worried about, they're all A relations, right? The case checking, the agreement, basically. Mm-hmm. Those things maybe are not probe goal things in the same way. But it even should affect just normal subject movement, possibly. Because if it supersedes everything, then you don't even know you were DP or not. So how do you move into spec of T, right, if you do it before? So suppose you want to scramble a subject. Of course, scrambling subjects is bad. So there's something weirdly promising about that, right? And, I mean, what are the A processes that are definitely movement? Well, subject movement, right? Well, object shift or something like that also. So, yeah, I mean, this has to be, is there a relativized kind of feature thing going on there too? We already need the Q plus Q. I mean, not the Q minus Q, but the A bar split somehow isn't the same as the Q minus Q split. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, yeah. But I don't think it's the end of the world. And in fact, the fact that you can't scramble subjects maybe is a good thing. Because the D could be overridden this way. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. That's cool. Oops. Right there.
Yes, I have just a minor observation which maybe supports your theorem, maybe just means nothing for it. So you of course have those echo WH phrases which do not have to move in Russian.
Right.
And
Or in English.
so yes, and for me 27A and 27B are perfect in an echo context. So so I haven't heard, I didn't hear. Ты что слышал, когда возили?
Right.
Ты кто видел, когда подъезжал?
Yes.
So if you not really have to WH move them, so you can scramble them.
I see. So you think that's scrambling and not WH movement? Possibly.
Yes, so in echo interpretation when those two are grammatical.
Cool. No, I'm going to claim that this supports my theory, but I have to figure out the details later. That's a very cool observation because it becomes like a WH in situ type of element because those normally don't have to move. They don't really have a plus Q because they're not really a question. And then they have the properties of WH in situ languages, and those can scramble WHs. So I think it's with me, but I have to figure out the details. It's a very good observation, though. Thank you. Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. Yeah. Yeah.
And yet another thing, wouldn't you need multiple specs if you have 3 WHs for like 19?
19?
Well, if you have 3 WHs, wouldn't this sub 3B have multiple specs?
Yes. Yes, but what you don't have to... So the question is, suppose you have 3 WHs and you build your cluster, and your cluster is all around C, you're going to need a multiple specifier, right? But that is not a language-specific thing. That's a thing that you will need any time you have, have 3. Well, I mean, the other possibility is that you create. So in the VP case, when we have 3 arguments, we have the VP shell, and we have arguments that there's a little v, and that gives you 2 specifiers, not multiple specifiers, and that's the basic idea behind the Larsonian shell, right? So maybe something similar happens here, and then we don't have a problem. Or you're allowed to have multiple specifiers, but it's not a language-specific property of Bulgarian. It could come up in any language where you were doing a derivation like this. So I don't actually have a principled objection to multiple specifiers. I just have a problem with that being a lexical difference between one language and another language. I have a principled problem with tucking in, because it doesn't make any sense. But multiple specifiers is maybe a necessary thing. It depends how much structure you have. Do you have cartography? Do you have little c above big C? How much shells are you willing to do? So that's a general property, but it should not depend on the language. And in your example, I don't think it would happen automatically. So I'm not that worried about that.
Couldn't shells then cease of relativized minimality because it would just be how to say different heads probing for different features.
For which cases?
Well, we could then deal with relativized minimality because as written, because all of the cases where something doesn't block something would be motivated by being probed by different heads.
Maybe, yes, maybe. It would be a totally different theory of syntax, and it would all be about the cartography that goes on at the edge of CP. And of course, there's a huge theory that says we have a lot of categories here, and that theory has problems because it's too weak. It should allow a lot of escaping that we don't actually see. So it would be a different way of doing it, right? Then you might not need the feature system, but your cartography system would have to be extremely sophisticated. And when you work it out, send me the paper, okay? I mean, it's possible. It's a different way of doing it. It's a good idea. But I think it runs into a lot of other problems that are kind of outside of today's talk that have to do with cartography in general. And we can talk about those, next year in the springtime or something. I don't know. Yeah. Or in the summer, right? Yeah. Should I say something about the summer school? Or are there questions? It's the time? More questions? Okay. So I was given the right to, oh yes. Yeah, please. Here comes a microphone right there. No, right there. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Things that have plus Q features and minus Q features, some of them look the same. For example, measure.
Right. That's right.
Measure
negation
plus
also. That's right. Yeah.
Are those different measures?
Yeah. No, it's that piece of it comes from Ritzy 2004, and he has but he has good discussion of why he thinks that some elements have the properties of both. So those actually have. So he thinks that certain kind of measure adverbs are both. The problem comes in his feature modification. So like quantificational adverb is both Q, because it's a quantifier, and it's a modifier, so it's mod. And for him, mod is a minus Q. So that one's going to have both. And so that's a bad thing not a great thing about his system. And then some people have systems that isn't like this, plus Q and minus Q, but there's a weird kind of thing where something's cross-categorized and it's not an even split for features. And that's probably more accurate. Mine is primitive, and his is a bit primitive, and some people have more sophisticated feature systems, and I have to learn more about that because that's important. And this is a side effect of that problem. So yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Can I actually ask a small question? Mm-hmm. I'm curious what happens when M4M3 happens, the quantificational DP stops being quantification. Well, in a sense, it stops being quantificational for the purposes of movement, right? It can be still quantificational, but it's invisibly quantificational, so to say.
Well, it's not, at least it doesn't participate in these blocking relations, yeah.
But it still has to be able to do quantificational things
like
for the semantics.
Right.
It has to take scope over things that it C-commands. But I guess it's not even C-command anything after it moves higher up.
So this is a similar problem to the one we heard before. With the 5 features, just in a different realm. Yeah. I have to think about it. Because it's not even C-command. It really depends on what motivates QR. And whether QR is part of the feature system or not. And I've always been a little bit wanting it not to be, so maybe now I have no choice. Right? Yeah, that doesn't actually even answer it because the C-command question is still a thing. So, but it does seem to show that it's not the same as WH movement, because WH movement seems to get overridden, and it's the Q is not up here in terms of syntactic blocking, but how so it does make it look less like normal or maybe it's not feature-driven movement at all. So it's a very good observation. Yeah, it's a similar problem to the other one in a way. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
You should have started introducing the scope, not more questions.
That's good. I like it.
Okay. I also wanted to ask about the universality of these features.
Yeah.
Because all of them seem to me like universal, except scrambling. So, is it true?
I see. So probably let's assume that that's true, right? Let's assume that some languages, I mean, I've sometimes argued that it isn't such a split between scrambling languages and non-scrambling languages, right? And I've sometimes argued that, you know, this is really, you know, they always go together with some discourse notion, some topic in focus and stuff. That's a sort of an open question. But let's assume what I said, which is it's not that stuff. It's a separate thing. Some languages have it and some languages don't. Okay? So that isn't necessarily a problem. You're right. That makes it different from all the other features. But all the other features are part of feature bundles, right? So it's part, you know, the word every, it's part of its lexical entry that it's quantificational, right? And the word boy, it's part of a lexical entry that it's a noun or something, right? All of these things are either inherent features of the word or they're, five features, it's plural or it's singular, but it's a noun thing, right? But they're attached to lexical entry. The scrambling thing is sort of more like, it's never an inherent, I mean, you can scramble anything in a scrambling language. So it's never an inherent feature of any item. That's what makes it different. So it's sort of like, you know, you have this thing, some languages you can put this thing on your table and then it starts to do its work. And other languages you don't have it at all. So it would be a parameter. But everybody says that scrambling is a parameter. There's scrambling languages and non-scrambling languages. And I can now say exactly what that is. You have this thing on your table in the scrambling languages, and you don't in the other languages. And then it starts to combine with whatever it can combine with. So I actually think, but I hadn't thought of it in those terms before. It is a very different, it's not really a feature. It's a separate functional, a head, floating around, you know, that is quite different from T, let's say, because T always combines with VP, let's say, or C, this thing, well, I don't know, what can it combine with DP? It can combine with CP for sure, PP definitely, VP maybe if verb phrases scramble. You know, it seems to be free in what it can attach to. So it's more like this available device that you can package other things into and make them scrambleable. And that maybe is exactly what the difference is between a scrambling language and a non-scrambling. So maybe it's a good thing for me. I don't know. Good question.
Джон, а можно по-русски?
Можно.
Хорошо. Существует ли для английского языка, ну, наверное, существует в виде корпуса, что-то подобное земской?
Думаю, что да.
И что там нет таких предложений, таких же weird sentences, как вот те, которые правильные.
По-русски?
По-английски. Мне, вот почему я спросила, я сразу же скажу, что мне показалось в связи с этим скрэмблингом,
Да.
который подтверждается вот этими очень странными примерами из земской, которые действительно, когда их читаешь, кажутся очень почему на вас и нападают, как вы говорите, часто, да?
Не,
Когда вы их приводите.
Да,
Так вот, вот пока еще, по-моему, минималистский синтаксис не дошел до того, чтобы включать и класть на стол в качестве элементов всякого рода паузы хезитации, перебои, которые случаются в речи, ну и тому подобное безобразие, которыми изобилует устная речь. Вот пока таких functional heads еще не завели, не ввели в дерево. Может быть, вот этот скрэмблинг, он принадлежит к тем же самым явлениям, которые, может быть, синтаксис и не должен о них думать, потому что вот они порождены ну вот с процессами порождены процессами порождения речи, которые несовершенны. Я сейчас говорила, и сколько всяких было ненужных вещей, которые бы я никогда не написала.
Can I answer in English? Is it okay? Okay. This is an excellent, I mean, this is a very interesting question to me. So I have several things to say about this, okay? First one is your point that maybe not everything gets to be on the table. And I totally agree with that, because when everything starts to be on the table, that's generative semantics from the 1970s, and we know how that ended, right? That was a total disaster. And I think that cartography has the same problem. It's an attempt to syntacticize everything. Whoa, ooh. See how bad a thing it must clearly be to do that? Right, well there's water on the table. Water is not part of the syntactic derivation. So I think you're right, and finding the right boundary between the things that are truly syntactic and the things that are not is extremely important, and there have been syntax people who want to bring everything onto the table, but I am not one of those people. I've never been a fan of cartography, which is a kind of thing like that, and generative semantics was a disaster, right? So I agree. Now, with respect to the scrambling feature itself, or the scrambling process, I think it should be on the table because of the first set of facts where it behaves restricted, just like WH movement, the ones where it is restricted. If it wasn't a syntactic phenomenon at all, it wouldn't have any restrictions at all, and it does. So we should be able to find diagnostics to tell us what is on the table and what isn't on the table. And the stuff you're talking about, I'm sure much of it should not be there, and then we need, you know, syntax is not everything, right? And we need a story on how those things combine and how they work. And that's not Bailyn territory, right? But it's a very interesting point. With respect to corpuses, corpora of English, I don't I don't work with corpus material, and I'm sure you could find stuff like that where we would get some weirdness, yes. On the other hand, what I do is I find those things, and then I, manipulate them in various ways and work with a lot of native speakers to see what is and is not possible. And I know a lot of the things that you can do in Russian, you cannot do in English, no matter what. So there is a difference, right? It's not just that we have Zemskaya that makes Russian look different from English, right? It is different from English. Like, so, for example, some basic word orders like subject, object, verb. Vanyu knigu читал. Totally fine in Russian in some circumstance. Is totally impossible in English. Right? You can topicalize the object, but John the book read, out. Or the book read John, knigu читал Ivan, with object, subject, object, verb, subject, my favorite construction, as you might know, right? Unavailable in English, and you will not find that one in corpus except in some maybe, like completely weird E.E. Cummings poems or something. But those aren't even sentences, So there are some basic things that you just cannot do. And so we need a story. And there's no good story on why it is that English can't do object, verb, subject. This is one of the big mysteries of my life. Like, I have a story on what happens in Russian there. Something similar happens in Japanese. You can't do it in English. You just cannot do it. And nobody knows why not. So, I don't think we'll find weird stuff in the English corpus, of course. But some stuff we won't find. So, it's a very interesting point. Yeah. Now I should talk about the summer school? Okay. So, as was mentioned in the introduction, we have a summer school in St. Petersburg. How many of you have attended it? Yay! Hi, guys. Yeah, you count, too. I have znaczki for our former graduates. Anyone who, you might have gotten one before. But we have, see, like this, NYI. So if you've been there before, you can have a znaczok, okay? If you haven't been there before, let me tell you about it a little bit. It's a 3-week intensive summer school in St. Petersburg where many people from this department have attended, some of them multiple times. I'll tell you, and we have, as you know, probably if you've heard of it, we have linguistics, a lot of linguistics. We have cognitive science, cognitive psychology, and we also have a whole cultural studies side with gender studies and film studies and some kind of comparative culture and all sorts of weird stuff that those humanities people do that I don't understand. I've learned a lot about film and stuff. And you take 4 or 5 of those classes. You can choose all linguistics classes if you want to do that. You can pick and choose from the available schedule. And I'll tell you about the linguists that we have this summer coming, okay? This summer it's from July 6th. It's late this year. It's going to mess up the thing with the expeditions, right? But anyway, it's from July 16th to August 3rd. So that's not great for some people. But we work with you. We make it work. This summer we have some new people. We have Daniel Altschuler from Hampshire College is teaching the Introduction to some Formal Semantics. He's fantastic and young, which is a good quality. We started the school 15 years ago when he would not have been able to teach there. We have from the City University of New York, which is not my university, it's the State University. From the City University of New York, we have Christina Tortora, and she works with her class is going to be on real spoken English, and she worked with Appalachian English, which is not even written down. And she goes into the mountains, and she really cares about exactly those issues, what goes on in the real spoken dialects of American English and other Englishes. So she's a syntax person, but it's really about informal spoken English. That's going to be fantastic. We have Andrew Nevins from University College London, who was with us at the very beginning. So he's not totally new, but he hasn't been with us for 12 years or something, who does morphology and phonology. On the phonology side, we have Oana Chitoran, who's now originally from Romania, who's now in Paris at Diderot. But before that, for many years, she was in the States at Dartmouth College, and we went to graduate school together a long time ago. And so she's going to be doing our phonology course. And then on the syntax side, Susie Wormbrand from the University of Connecticut / the University of Vienna, because she's now based in Vienna primarily, who will do a sort of topics in syntax advanced kind of classes. She is fantastic. You probably know her work. And she's been with us a couple of years. Omer Preminger from the University of Maryland, who is kind of just, the way his mind works is amazing. But anyway, he's a kind of brilliant new person on the syntax scene. He's doing the introductory course and also some advanced stuff in syntax. On the cognitive science side, John Drury, who was there last year, will be back doing a thing about language and other mental modules, including visual representations. So he's doing a course that basically compares language and comics. The syntax of comics. They have a structure. They do. And there's ungrammatical sequences. There are. And that's what his course is about. It's crazy stuff. It's about modularity, right? We have, and then I'm going to do this year, I'm doing musical cognition because I didn't do it last year. I did syntax last year. Sometimes I do, so I do sort of introductory thing about musical structures. And then there's a lot of, I'm trying to remember if I forgot. But anyway, those are some of the people doing the linguistic stuff and cognitive stuff. There's a lot of interesting cultural studies also. We give mini grants. It's not particularly expensive, but we give little mini grants, and we provide dormitory space that you have to pay for, but it's not expensive if you don't have your own place to live. And applications are already available. You can see I can just write the website on the board, I guess, which is NYI, it's really easy to remember, SPB-RU. That's it. So you can go there and just read more about it, and very easy to understand. And you can read more about it, and you can apply through there, and you can write us and get more information, all that stuff. And I don't know, I mean, some of you who've been there before have anything to say like good? No? Anybody with on it? So some of the students who've been there before this is your opportunity to say something. I hated it, like that. It's a free country. You can say what you want. They're not going to do it.
Otherwise, you won't get snatchok.
No, you get a snatchok anyway. But anyone, or would you like to? Because it has a kind of particular atmosphere, which is a little bit hard to describe. And I don't want to be too much like a salesman. So I'd be happier if students said something. Or former faculty. Very good idea.
Приведя себя в порядок.
Okay.
После содержательнейшего доклада спасибо большое, Джон.
Thank you. Спасибо.
Спасибо.